This week on NWP. But Aquaman, you can't marry a woman from the surface. You're from two different worlds. Hello everyone and welcome to Nerds Without Pants, episode 35. I am Julian, and I am joined as always by Patrick.
Julian, I knew you did something. I knew you before this, and now I know why, because that was like a great impression. And you did that voice acting, didn't you?
It's kind of sad how well I can channel comic book guy. Also his lifestyle, but that's another story. We also have Angelo.
Hello. I'm just curious, Aquaman, does he live in a pineapple?
No. Under the sea.
Under the sea. I'm sorry, I'm not that bad, but I don't have, well, we'll get it. I don't have a whole lot of comic book experience, but I'm not that bad.
Once again, you make me want to end this podcast early.
Wait for me to work near it. It's going to happen.
And we have a returning special guest from Movies.com and the owner of GuttersandPanels.com. We have John, who is a vain and cruel, greedy child.
And you are an old man and a fool!
Yes! It's the worst line from Thor 1, everybody.
The best line from Thor 1.
John, welcome back. It's good to have you.
Hi, it's good to be back on.
Excellent. You got your podcasting voice on as well. And in case you listeners haven't figured it out, this week's episode of Nerds Without Pants is going to be all about funny books. It's going to be a different format this time. Instead of Consumption Junction, this opening segment is going to be all about the actual physical comic books themselves, and then the second segment is going to be about comic books based on video games. And we've kind of got a nice little setup for that. So I think the best way to tackle this, we have a huge comic book enthusiast in John Gholson, and then we have someone who doesn't really read comics at all in Angelo Grant. So we have this nice little spread of experience. So we're going to try to mix things up a little bit. So, John, I wanted to start with you because your knowledge of comic books continues to astound me anytime that you and I get together and we hang out and we talk. And, I mean, I could just listen to you talk about comics for days. But I kind of wanted to know how that started and when you got in and, like, what was the book? Because there's always a book for everybody that is, like, that thing that is, like, this is what I want to read.
Yeah, well, the story for me is that my grandmother taught, she was a home tutor for special ed kids. And so when I was a toddler, I was at her house a lot because my mom was a single mother and she would drop me off at her mother's house. When I was over there, I ended up, hanging out during all these phonics lessons and everything. So by the time I was like 4 or 5, I was actually able to read pretty good. Just based on the fact that I was taught so early. And so it's one of those things where comics have always been around. Like, it's hard to think of the time that they weren't. I remember my earliest ones were probably, the 1977, Marvel Star Wars special that was like the oversized, it was printed larger than a normal comic, not thicker, but just like big, gigantic, like a little bit bigger than a magazine size. That was one of the first ones I had. And then, I know back then as well, I had like an issue of Adventure Comics, which DC was publishing at the time with, I think they were splitting the stories actually between Aquaman and Plastic Man and Adventure at the time. But the one that hooked me at a young age was probably Fantastic Four. And, really got its claws in me was the Fantastic Four comics. I was a fan of the cartoon. I really liked The Thing. And those were the ones that I follow's the wrong word, because when you're like 4 or 5 years old, it's not like I had a subscription pull box or anything like that. But they were the ones that I was the most interested in, those early Fantastic Four comics. It's funny because I've actually gone back and looked to see the ones that I had when I was that age, and the ones that I had were actually incredibly dark. One of the earliest comics I had was like a an Exorcist riff with Franklin Richards possessed by a demon, which is pretty heavy stuff and darker than most Fantastic Four stuff. But that was really the one that hooked me.
Very cool. Yeah, I kind of had a similar experience as far as like traumatic comics when I was really little, because my older cousin had some Captain America books and stuff that also went into a really dark place. And I remember like thinking back now, it's like those were not really meant for kids, but kids read them.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the same Captain America stuff that I've gone back and revisited recently. Was it the stuff with the Red Skull's daughters, the Sisters of Sin?
That sounds familiar. I really couldn't say. I mean, I just remember it being like kind of terrifying because I think I was probably like 7 or 6 when I saw it. So and he had them hid away, and that was the thing is that we knew they were hidden away. So my cousin and David and I, who were about the same age, we tried to we successfully found them, and then were instantly terrorized and never did that again.
Yeah, there's a mid-'80s run. It sort of leads up to the death of the Red Skull, and it's about his daughters called the Sisters of Sin. And that run always stuck with me because I had friends that had those issues, and I always thought those issues were really dark and really weird. And recently, I picked up the trade and reread it, and it was not very good. It was quite a letdown. They were actually really haphazardly plotted and poorly written, but I should have left it in my memory as like this awesome, dark, twisted story, but I bet that's the same storyline.
It might be. I feel like there was someone that got their face melted off or something like that, like something really gruesome.
Oh yeah, well Baron Zemo has an origin story as part of it, and in Baron Zemo's origin flashback, they do show him like get his like face messed up and everything.
It might be that. It's funny because I actually, before I started working for Pixelbit, I wrote for a site called Metal Arcade, and I was writing there right around the time of the New 52 launched, and people were all up in arms over Starfire, in her sexiness and some of the other stuff going on. And I wrote this piece about how comic books were never really for kids. Like, they weren't for kids when I was growing up. Like, and I'll talk about it a little bit, but I mean, I saw some really messed up stuff in my comics as a young boy, like Tony Stark getting shot in the chest and then skidding down a wall because he had jilted some, young lover. And, of course, like the death of Robin, which, was actually my first superhero comic. Just really dark, not for kids stuff, but I mean, I read it and I turned out just fine.
Yeah, I had a Teen Titans. This is another early comic that I had probably like in second grade or so. The book fair came into town, and this is really before the proliferation of like trade paperbacks. They weren't really collecting stuff until like the late 80s. But they had this like regular mass market paperback version of the first few issues of New Teen Titans, where they kind of re-edit it. They take the pages and they cut them down to like 2 panels a page, so that the book is the size of like a regular paperback, and it's all black and white. Have you ever seen those?
No, I haven't.
I found the New Teen Titan ones that I used to have as a kid. I found it in a store, so I repurchased it. I'll show it to you the next time you're at the house. But it's funny you bring up Starfire, because the first time I ever read anything that acknowledged that superheroes had sex with each other was Starfire and Robin waking up in the same bed in that New Teen Titans book that I had in like second grade. It's funny because I think comics, there's a little bit of rock and roll to comics, in that I feel like they should be. It feels like part of comics should be like a little bit dangerous, just a little bit beyond your grasp as a kid. I think that's part of the fun of comics. And it didn't necessarily rob me of my innocence or make me like a darker person or anything like that. But I think there's something challenging when you're a kid, when you read something that's a little bit away from your grasp. I think it's challenging emotionally and intellectually. I think it makes for smarter, sharper kids, if we can say that about ourselves, having read comics as kids.
No, I agree, because I think that typically with kids, like, there are things you're going to get and there's things you're not, and there's also things you're going to be like, I don't really understand that, but maybe I will down the line. And like me as a kid, I definitely felt that. I remember it distinctly. I was at a B. Dalton, and I picked up an issue of Uncanny X-Men. I think it had Madeline Pryor as the Goblin. Is it Goblin Queen?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I flipped through it and I was like, I'm not ready for this. Like, I just knew that it wasn't for me, and then later on I became like the biggest X-Men fan. But some stuff, was just fine, and then other stuff you just kind of don't grasp. Like, I kind of, thinking about modern comics, I was thinking about you and I talking about, that Ultimates comic where Hank Pym, shrinks down and basically, enters the Wasp.
Yeah.
But, like, I was thinking that if you're a kid and you're reading that, you're actually not really going to get what's going on. I don't think, like, unless you've seen some stuff on the internet that you shouldn't have. So, I wouldn't think it would be like the most corrupting thing in the world. It'd just be more like a head scratcher for a few years until you kind of get the hang of it.
Yeah, well, there's, I don't know. And then some of that stuff you tuck away in your kid brain and you pull it out later and realize, oh, this is what was actually going on,
Yeah, exactly. Well, what are a couple of your favorite, series or story arcs? I mean, I know you've got the list could go on, but like a couple that really stand out, especially for our listeners who maybe are just getting into comics, thanks to like the Marvel movies. I mean, we just had Thor 2 come out over the weekend and stuff like that, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Arrow are on like big on TV right now.
Oh, well, some of the stuff like across the board, like if you're a little bit younger, maybe, Christmas is coming up, the holidays are coming up, people buying presents and stuff like that. But like one that I think was the right comic at the right time was Secret Wars. Secret Wars just blew me away because it was like everybody, all in one big like battle. Like it was so awesome. I think that's why a lot of people love Infinity Gauntlet. Secret Wars as an adult, not the greatest comic in the world. It's still a lot of fun. But the great thing about Secret Wars is you get so many superheroes for your buck. In terms of stuff that I have liked for a long time and even now, like I still think are some of my favorite comics of all time, Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing is probably my favorite all-time run of anybody on anything. Those are all available as collections. I think there's like 8 different collections of the Alan Moore stuff, and you can get paperback or hardback or digital or however, but when he's known for Watchmen and V for Vendetta and things like that, but his work on Swamp Thing is just they're horror comics. They're actually scary. The characterization in them is really, really deep. On the flip side of that, around the same time period, or actually a little bit after Moore had left the book, Justice League from DC, when the team was Giffen, DeMatteis. I'm a big fan of that stuff. That stuff is probably more indicative of like my personality, because it's really they're really fun superhero books. They're very playful and lighter in tone. They do get serious at times. I think the books are known as being funny, but when you actually read them, they have a lot of dramatic moments as well, which just shows how versatile the writers are and how versatile the team actually was during that time. Had a really popular run. Sorry,
this is like Guy Gardner and Booster Gold era.
Yeah. This is like late 80s. If you look for the writers, and the writers on a Justice League book say Giffen and DeMatteis, those are the ones that I think are really stand out. They don't have the core like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman team. Batman's in there sometimes, Superman's in there sometimes, but just in terms of what I like from superhero comics, they're really what I enjoy in superhero comics, which is where the characters sort of take precedent over the plot. The dialogue between the characters, the relationship between the characters, to me, that's the selling point to me over whether or not, like, whatever the stakes of the plot are is always secondary to me. And the book really has that focus, characters over the actual plotting. So it's one that even now I go back and revisit, over and over and over again. I mean, there's so much good stuff now. Like, you can get a subscription to Marvel Unlimited for like $60 a year and then read literally their entire back catalog of comics. They're trying to get everything they've ever done scanned, and then they've got like a 6-month backlog on new comics. So there's so much stuff out there. There's literally, like, that's the thing that gets me is people that go to like San Diego Comic-Con and stuff. Like, I have peers that cover it, and they don't read any books, and I'm like, there's something out there for everyone. Like, there really is. And I don't think people realize that. I think people think it's just a world of, guys in capes punching each other, and it's like there's so much more. I mean, yeah, I recommended nothing but superhero books just now, but there's so much out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm a big superhero guy. Like, that's pretty much like everything that I read, but there's stuff out there like Liberty Meadows and Bone and Strangers in Paradise and The Walking Dead, and I mean, there really is. I mean, and then you can get like really crazy stuff like Tarot, Witch of the Black Rose if you want. Like there's really there's a flavor for everybody.
Yeah.
Bone, I got like one of the kids who's like 8 years old, one of the sons at the place I work, into it. He read it like over 40 times.
Oh man. I only have the first volume of Bone, but it has like one of my favorite little pieces of interaction between two characters ever, where he first meets the girl and they're at the campfire and there's like silence and he's just staring at her, and then she says something like, and he's like, Bone, what's yours? He's just like yelling because you can tell that he wants to say something, but he's too scared, and then she breaks the ice and immediately like it just comes flooding out of him. It's such an adorable moment.
Yeah, man, it's great. And I just found out today that it was actually adapted into like a video game. I couldn't believe that.
I remember that, yeah. And I've always thought that it could have worked really well as an animated something.
And it was so popular when I brought it to school, the kids eventually ripped off the cover and ripped it in two.
I guess that is an indication of childhood interests. But Patrick, go ahead, John.
I was going to say that's exactly what happened to that new Teen Titans book I was talking about. I read it till both of the covers came off, and then the interior pages started falling off the glue.
Exactly.
I actually, when I get to mine, I have a similar story. But Patrick, it's funny because I kind of got the impression as we've been doing the show that you had kind of read like some more esoteric type stuff, years ago, but then you hadn't really gotten into like comic book collecting as a thing until just when the New 52 started. But as I understand it, you've actually been into comics a lot longer than that. Is that right?
Yeah. I got sick one time when I was like first, second grade or something like that, and my mom brought me to the comic book store. I think I had chicken pox or something. Not like after the fact, like that it's like contagious, and like I got out and like got like a Green Lantern book that was the origin of Hal Jordan, and that was like the first thing I ever read. And I was like, wow, like this is a superhero. I'd only previously seen them before in like Batman the Animated Series or something like that. So like I always wanted to get sick from then on, and I always associated comics with healing. So every time I got like some sort of cold or something, my mom would stay home from work and go get me a comic, and I got really into like Sonic, and for some reason I just checked Sonic recently, and he's like,
it's still going.
Yeah. Wow. Like the old comics are actually worth a ton of money because there weren't that many of them printed or something, like over 50 a comic, and I was like, damn, if I didn't read these until the covers fell off, like,
the Sonic stuff boggles my mind because so many books that I've loved have come and gone, and Sonic remains.
I understood it for a long time because it's like a newsstand book, so it's one that like would be on the spinner racks or it would be at grocery stores. But it's like, how at this point in 2013 is Sonic still a monthly title?
Never underestimate the furries, John.
Kids love Sonic. They really do. There's one of my kids, their friends, he just has like Sonic T-shirts and Sonic posters, and it's still going. I don't really get it, but Sonic is still going strong, even like in...
Doesn't it need good games to go along with that?
You would think that.
But no, because the kids love the Sonic games. And that's the thing that we'll get to, I think, as we start talking about like the worst like comic book games in the second segment. Because I know there's one that's going to come up, but it's one that actually sold really, really, really well because kids loved it. And we'll get back to it later. All I'm going to say now is Flying Through Rings. You can extrapolate from that. But Patrick, it's what's that?
The dreams?
Yeah.
The one thing about the Sonic games still making an appearance is I think a lot of your foundational likes and dislikes come from the games you play as a kid. And a lot of times parents will go to the store that aren't playing video games anymore because a lot of people our age did kind of bow out of the hobby once they went to college or got out of college or whatever. And, those that have kids now see a Sonic game, they're like, oh yeah, I know that's a good game for kids. I know that's safe. And I know that's something I liked when I was their age, so I'll pick that up for them. And so naturally the kids kind of gravitate toward that. And Sonic is still fast, and, it's still a good they're still okay platformers, even if they're not to the level of polish that we remember them being. So it's not too surprising to me that kids would kind of gravitate towards still.
And I'd also make the argument that they weren't actually all that great to begin with back in the day. That's another story for another time.
I was not a Sega boy, so I really couldn't pontificate on that a whole lot more. But
yeah. But Patrick, it's so funny that you talk about comics reminding you of healing, and I think your mom and I would, and my mom would get along really well, because that was totally my thing too. Is I was really sickly in school, and I would be out for like days and weeks at a time, and my mom would stay home from work and take care of me. But one thing that she would do when she would like get my prescriptions and stuff is buy me like 5 or 6 comics off of the rack, and it was just like just random stuff. I remember like an issue of Starman that I read, 100 times, and somehow I got almost the entire storyline of Superman when they introduced Warworld and Mongul, which is really, really cool. That's like an amazing Superman story, but like somehow I was sick like multiple times around that time frame, and so I got like a bunch of different pieces of it. So like, and it's a story where like Superman ends up off-world for a really long time. He grows a beard, and like he gets enslaved because he's like no longer, he's not as powerful because he's not near the yellow sun. And he ends up on this planet where it's like gladiatorial fights and Mongol. And this was this character's like introduction. And he's like a major villain now, but he was trying to force Superman to kill. And of course Superman wouldn't kill. And then of course Superman saves the day and comes back to Metropolis after like a long time in space. But that story was really cool, and I wouldn't have gotten it if I hadn't been sick and my mom wasn't so nice to me.
Yeah. You can get out of a lot and just read comic books. Like, you can get out of feeling sick. I feel like sometimes it's just a great escape, and I used to escape a lot growing up to the comic book store. Like, after church or something on Sunday, I would go like before the mass was over or before it began. And just, find something that I'd want to read and post up actually in the store, because this was a point when like comic books kind of like cost too much for me. Like when I didn't have a job, like way before growing up, when I didn't have like any source of income at all and like no allowance really, it was just like go in there and start reading until they kicked me out or something like that. And it was also just, a great place to go when I didn't want to go other places, and I knew I could get out of it.
So is there a particular like book or issue that got you into it, or is it just like that Green Lantern that kind of opened your eyes?
Oh yeah, it had to be Green Lantern. I still have that very like graphic novel that my mom got me, like just like sitting on the mantle, because like it reminds me of like how far I've come, from where I started.
Wait, this wouldn't be Green Lantern Rebirth, would it?
No, I have Rebirth too.
Oh, okay. I was about to feel very old for a second.
Yeah, no, that was like the third stage of my comic book reading. Like once I got a job finally, I was like, fuck yeah, I can buy everything I ever wanted. And I just went to the comic book store and started buying like 20 of them at a time or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was like, that was around that time or later.
So, favorites, like, series or story arcs? Like, old or new?
Well, what got me back into it to stay, like, when I finally, like, went back and had a job was the Sandman Chronicles, and that's, it's well documented on this podcast. It's, like, my favorite property.
Yeah.
But, so I won't talk too much more about that, but that's definitely where I would start, and, like, number one overall. Other great story arcs, I feel like, are, like, Hush from Batman. Like, some things like that where, like, every super villain is, like, after the superhero is always great. And, like, they all, like, try to culminate into one new thing. I actually like the new Batman stories a ton, too, but, like, he's my favorite superhero anyway. I like this Forever Evil story arc that's going on, but even more so over in Marvel, I like the Deadpool versus Deadpool story, like quadrilogy or trilogy. There were like 4 series in a row or 3 series in a row of like 4-issue story arcs that like kind of go together. And the latest one that just wrapped up is called Deadpool Kills Deadpool. And like there's so many ideas that will just like open your mind over and over again. And it like eventually Deadpool finds out that he is like the progenitor of all things hero and human. So like, there's like a multiverse, and like it goes into the detail about like how there could be like versions of Deadpools, and it's very like postmodern and not usually written about in like superhero form. So I really like that story arc now.
Yeah, I want to read Deadpool, but I never know where to start. I actually did pick up, I guess, the first, or no, it was just like a random issue of like his most recent series, and I couldn't tell what was going on. Like, he's talking to himself. There's like 3 different personalities in there, and meanwhile there's like a dead version of Deadpool that has like a backwards arm, and Captain America was in there, and I don't know.
Oh yeah, he saves Captain America and Wolverine's lives, like, and they're indebted, and now like they don't mind him so much. I don't know if it's like going to be continuous between like all series, because he's a good source of comedy, you know, for everyone putting him down and stuff. But he's actually, you know, one of my top 3 heroes.
Nice.
But other superheroes I like was like Hawkeye. That hasn't really let up since the first issue of the new story, which is like 13 issues long so far. But since you guys mostly talked about superheroes, I'll just rattle off a few that I'd start with that aren't superhero oriented. Coffin Hill just started. Pretty Deadly was pretty good. Sex Criminals is hilarious, written by Matt Fraction, who also writes Hawkeye. And it like, I don't know, it's like Kama Sutra in comic book form, except told through a story where when this guy has sex, like the world stops.
Yeah, I've been curious in getting that one, and then I forgot about it.
Yeah, it's I don't know, been hilariously over the top so far. And finally, out of the new ones, I think is God is Dead, written by Jonathan Hickman, who's like, he's on fire recently, right? I think he's writing Avengers, right? Or not Avengers. Yeah,
he's doing
Avengers.
Infinity, I think, right? I mean, I know you're a big Hickman fan, and then John, you're much less of a Hickman fan, which I always enjoy. Listening to the two of you.
Yeah,
I don't really follow him, but I also know that he's like, he does the Manhattan Projects, and that is like one of the best comic series that's like just started to come out. But the latest one maybe is my favorite. I don't know, it's only been 2 issues, but God is Dead, I really dig it because all the like old gods like come to life again, and they like wreak havoc on the world. I think it's just like a fun, like, possible post-apocalyptic storyline. But yeah.
Very cool. Well, Angelo.
Yeah.
As you have pointed out numerous times on this show when we start talking comics, is that you don't read comics.
Not like an active disdain for them, but I do.
No.
Yeah.
But the thing that I find interesting and what I want to hear from you, because you and I are the exact same age, which means that we were both teenagers in the 90s when comic books were having the biggest boom ever. And like, it was actually cool to read comics for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I just want to know, because I know you're a big reader, you know, and you're also a really big geek. So like, how did that pass you by? Or did you end up picking up, you know, something here and there back then?
And see, this is a weird question to just kind of have to, let's see. I think that's kind of a tough question to answer because I can't tell you how I didn't come across something. It's easier to tell you how I did. But if I were to guess, yeah, you know, I mean, people were talking about comic books and stuff when I was going to school in the 90s, and it wasn't like I was unaware of the trend. It just never grabbed me, and I think there's a few reasons. I mean, I did read comic books. I just didn't read them. I appreciate them almost the same way I appreciate anime. You know, I've seen and read, I guess, as far as comics go, like the standards, like The Watchmen, and you know, some of the bigger story arcs. I mentioned Maximum Carnage before. So even some of the weird offshoot ones, if they just caught my attention. But I think why I never gravitated toward them is because I was never, and this still goes for anime and stuff like that, if I don't feel like a story is going to resolve, I get really fed up with it. And the thing about comics is that it's usually, it gives the impression of, or it is, just like a never-ending story, you know? They just keep going, and they don't really, there's miniature arcs, but the miniature arcs are more like Saturday morning cartoon shows. Like, I could get the same miniature arc in a half hour watching a cartoon that I did when I was a kid, you know? And I don't mean that in a condescending way, so don't misinterpret what I'm saying, because I've had plenty of great experiences as well. But I always just felt like it wasn't as satisfying. I never got a satisfying arc out of a thing. Now, I love origin stories. And I still, when they do the comic movies and stuff, I will go see the first whatever movie it is, because I love origin stories, because they have a greater arc to me. They have a definite beginning and they have a definite end, where it's like, okay, and now Tony Stark is Iron Man, and he will go do what Iron Man does, and that's good. I can walk away from that there. That's satisfying. But then, the monster of the week stuff, which isn't always the case, but I'm just using that more as an expression. That stuff just kind of bugs me. It was kind of like watching Lost. The first 2 seasons of Lost, I was like, great, okay, wrap this up, and then they went on for like 4 more seasons or whatever they did, and I'm like, I hate you now. That isn't probably everybody's experience with comics, but I think that's just why they never grabbed me. And it is really the same way with anime. If I sense a series has gone on too long and there's just too much filler, I will just straight up abandon it. One of the reasons why I like Evangelion so much, I think, is because I knew from the beginning that this was a 1-season deal, and by the time it was over, all this stuff was going to be tied up. Now, was it neatly tied up with a little bow on top? No. But it did resolve. It did finish. And it was a heck of a ride. So,
I love that show.
I do too. I think that's my biggest reason, but I think the other one is just availability. Frankly, I grew up kind of in an area where there weren't a whole lot of comic stores around. There wasn't really just a place where I could run up a couple of city blocks and grab like a book, or it just wasn't that accessible to me. I never really had that kind of cash just hanging in my pocket to just go and spend on a comic book. So when I did have the chance, I would buy a complete volume of whatever it was I was interested in. So I wouldn't buy the issues of Maximum Carnage. Once the arc was over, I went and bought like the whole, and man, was that a thick thing. I bought a whole stack, the whole complete bound edition of, Maximum Carnage, and read that. And that was basically how I consumed comics. So,
Angelo, I'm just thinking out loud here, but now that you mention it, I didn't realize how easy it was growing up for like me to get comics in a big city. Like every free comic book day, it was just like at the library, and you could take them. So I got like issues of The Tick that I never would have read. But yeah, I took it for granted, I guess.
Yeah, and we had a library, but I was going to go there once a week, so I wasn't going to get a comic book that I was going to. I straight devoured books as a kid. Like, I would just tear through a 100-page book in a couple of days.
Yeah.
So if I got a comic book, that wouldn't last me too long. So when I went to, now I would get comic book related books, but they would be without the illustrations. Like, it sounds so weird, but I remember I read, and it's not that weird. You guys probably read these too, but I remember specifically reading a couple of Iron Man and a couple of Batman just novels. Just text on a page with no pictures. And I enjoyed them. But that was another, I never got into the serialized buy a book a week or whatever type of consuming.
I have a question then.
Sure.
Because I don't know you very well, Angelo, and I don't know Patrick very well at all. Now, like, I know Julian really well.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that Julian and I both have an interest in art. Like, we both draw.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether Patrick or you, Angelo, have that same interest. So
yeah.
Like, beyond just the written word, like, it's one thing, like, we're reading exciting, fantastical stories in our youth, but it's also, like, informing our artistic interests as well in regards to, like, fine art and drawing and that kind of thing. Did you guys have an interest in that?
Oh, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
I have a little bit of a blog on Pixel Bit, but like I don't have that much stuff drawn. The only problem for me is like when I start drawing something, I start to think of a story too, and then I end up just writing a story instead.
I'm definitely drawn more toward the written word, probably than visual forms of art, but and music too.
For me, like the art is like more of a meditational kind of like a release for me. Like when I really need to like sit down and just focus on one thing. It's kind of like doing a puzzle. Like, for me, since I draw so slowly, I know it's not for you, John, just because, like, you've done it so much that, like, you can draw so quickly. But, like, for me, it's like the one big thing I'll do that night or something.
Well, I can. That's kind of an interesting story too. I have actual horrible fine motor coordination, which is weird because I spend most of my life behind a keyboard. I cannot draw. I have very strong visual imagery. Like, I can picture exactly what I want to draw, but actually putting pen to paper, I can't make my hand do what my mind wants it to do, if that makes sense. It's not like a disability or anything. It's just, like, when I'm typing, I will, every once in a while, mash a couple of keys at once instead of just hitting the key I mean to. And that, when you're typing, is not a big deal. But when you're doing, like, a really fine activity, like drawing something on a piece of paper, that translates into a really crappy thing. So, I wish I could draw. I did some experimentation when I was younger. Honestly, under the influence of Star Fox, I started making images based totally off of lines, and I sat there with a straight edge and just drew images and pictures out of lines, and they turned out pretty cool. They just looked really geometric. But that was about the extent of my drawing. So I have an interest in it, but I'm not very good at it. Really what my interests are artistically are more like music and writing. Now, while I say, like, visuals aren't the biggest thing, they are a huge thing. Like, some of the movies, it's like I'll watch a movie and just be like, wow, that looks gorgeous, and be really impressed with stuff that's visually stunning. But I probably don't gravitate toward that as much, just because it's not something that I can involve myself in. I think just human nature, we're more involved in what we can participate in ourselves, So, the fact that I don't have the ability to draw may play a factor into this.
I was thinking, Angelo, about the first thing that I drew over and over again that I can remember, because you mentioned something like that in passing, and I was like, it's weird that the first thing I used to draw a lot was South Park.
Oh, yeah.
I was like in 4th grade, and like all of us, we wanted to watch it, but we couldn't watch it yet, so we started just drawing the characters.
And it's so crappy too. Like, that's pretty easy to draw, because it's just like a circle, and that is very basic.
Yeah.
John, are you okay there, buddy?
Yeah. Well, my deal is that I didn't have any concept of how old Patrick was until he mentioned going to the library for free comic book store or free comic book day as a kid, and I went, free comic day has only been around since the mid 2000s, and I was like, oh my god. So yeah. Anyways, no, I'm all right.
Okay, yeah, because I was also I was in high school when South Park started, so.
No,
dude, it might be a different one though, but I'm sure I got a free comic book from the 90s, actually, like this Tick one. I'll have to look into it. Must be something else.
The library might have been doing something to try to get kids to read. I know a lot of libraries will try to do certain things to bring the kids in. And comic books, if it was the 90s, comic books were really huge then, so.
Yeah, you could be right. But it wasn't the full thing now. This thing is huge, the free comic book day.
Oh yeah. I have never been to a free comic book day. I have worked every year that there's been a free comic book day. Like I've worked that day.
Yeah.
So the next free comic book day, because I now have weekends off officially, like all the time, I'll go to check it out. Because my comic book store is really awesome, and they always have a lot of great deals most of the time, and especially free comic book day.
You know what?
Nice.
I hate to do this. Can I get back to that visual thing real quick?
Yeah.
Because I used to play a lot of Magic the Gathering, and one of the first things that drew me to that game wasn't the game itself, because it's like anything. If you see a video game, the first thing you see about it is how it looks. The first thing that drew me to Magic the Gathering was the art on the cards, and I wish I'm gonna have to go through some of my cards and get some of the names of these people, because there was one. He was even an artist. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this guy's work. So there's definitely a pull that I have toward visual art as well. I don't want to make it sound like that is the lowest of the tier, but it's like, I'm into art. I will walk through I will walk through a museum and look at art pieces hanging on a wall, and I will probably spend all day there. It's just, what do I spend the most time doing? Well, it's probably appreciating music and appreciating, written word, so.
And also, you being such a big book fan, I can almost see you preferring the type of art that you would see, like, on the cover of, like, a Tor fantasy book.
Yeah.
Because, I love me some Luis Arroyo, who does, like, almost all of the book covers for Tor fantasy. And that's, like, right in the Magic of the Gathering wheelhouse as far as the type of art.
Yeah.
So I can totally see you gravitating towards that.
And backing it up a bit, there may be something to the fact that I like to leave a little bit to the imagination. I remember we talked ages ago about me falling in love with RPGs and the original Final Fantasy and talking about how I'd be playing this game, but in my mind, so much more would be happening than what was on the screen. And comic books don't give you as much room to do that as reading something as text on a page does. So that could be a factor too. There's a lot of different reasons why maybe comic books didn't stick with me as well as other media did, but it didn't, so that's the story.
Well, and I find it to be an interesting story. We won't obviously get, like, recommendations from you but what I think we'll do at the end, like, to wrap up the segment, is that I think we'll all, like, recommend a book to you, specifically that you should check out, and then, of course, the audience can try those out as well. We're not saying we're going to make you a comic book fan, but I think it'd be interesting to like see if you check out some of these or some of these recommendations and see what you think, like check back in like in a couple months.
I will say this too. If you haven't seen the comic book version of The Watchmen, go do that. Just really go do that. There's a reason why people talk about it. There's a reason why they made a movie based off of it. And I prefer the comic to the movie. I think a lot of people that read the comic first did, but that's just how it is. There's when every single time a medium comes up, people mention a specific thing, which is kind of what I feel like happens a lot with The Watchmen. There's a reason for it. So if you haven't gotten around to that yet, if there's going to be a recommendation for me, I'd say it's that. So.
Yeah, I didn't like the Watchmen comic all that much.
Oh yeah, but
but I saw the movie first, so
okay,
that's my caveat.
Fair enough.
See, I feel like the source is like always the best, and you can't really like approach that level like at a new medium once you adapt it, because something's obviously lost. Like usually it's made by someone else, or you're not in the right mindset or the same mindset when you adapt it in the future, and you don't really have the same like thought processes that you had to create that original. And like I don't know, there's something that always makes the book better than the movie for me.
Right.
Well, I appreciate Watchmen for what it represents and what it did for comics. I think for me, just going back and reading it, one, after all the hype, and two, after the movie, which I freaking love the movie, I feel like the squid monster was weird, and anytime that they would go flash into the pirate story that the kid was reading, I was just like, no, this is boring. I thought that was
kind of cool.
Yeah, see, I just wanted to skip all of that.
Also, the monster thing was like such an obvious, like, the thing had a giant butthole in the middle of it. It's like, what is this? What? I didn't get that even when I was reading the comics. I was like, what is this? I know what that is, dude. You're not hiding that from me.
Yeah, but the fact that it was like the first thing to really introduce like the flawed superhero.
Oh yeah.
And kind of humanize them. Like, I respect that, because without Watchmen, there's no powers, and there's no Invincible, and there's no, Dark Knight and stuff like that. So I definitely respect it. It's just, as far as actually reading it, I did it the one time, and I'll probably just go back to the movie from now on.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I can feel John seething.
In some ways, though, for you, Julian, like, that is the source for you. Like, since you saw it first, it's definitely your source for, like, that content.
That's true. And that tends to be, like, usually the way it is that whatever you experience first is what you prefer. Mm-hmm. With a few cases. There's definitely cases where, it's the other way around for me. But for example, like, I read The Godfather, and then I watched The Godfather, and I loved the book, and I did not like the movie. So, stuff like that. But, I find it interesting. I feel like I can kind of definitely pick a little bit from Patrick and John's experiences as far as my own. My dad's a terrible person. I don't like to talk about him. But if there's one thing that he did right with me, it's that, he read to me a lot, like even before I could read. So I have like a lot of early childhood memories of him just like propping me on his lap and reading books to me, like full on books for, like young adults and older, and like Edgar Rice Burroughs and stuff like that, like stuff that was way beyond me. But, I was a big Transformers fan from, the time I was 4. So I do remember, they would buy me like the Transformers comics. And I distinctly remember him reading I think it's like issue 7 or 9, something like that. It's the one with, the mechanic in it. If anybody remembers the original Generation 1 Transformers comic. But I remember him reading it to me, and I couldn't read very well, but even just him, reading to me all that time before school, I was definitely picking things up, and by the time I got to first grade, I was reading it beyond a 5th grade level. So, just like John, like comics were like a thing, for a long time, but it was really just Transformers, and I kind of downplay that one because that was just based, it was a licensed property based on a line of toys and cartoon that I loved, although if I'm being technical, I think the comic might have debuted before the cartoon. But anyway, my first superhero book was 1989. I was 9 years old. It was the trade paperback for Batman: A Death in the Family, which, if you don't know, the second Robin, that was Jason Todd, was so disliked by fans because he was such a little dick that DC finally decided, okay, well, you know what? We're going to take a vote. You can call this 900 number and let us know if we should kill him or keep him alive. And the fans killed him. And it was this big news story, and like it was all over the press and everything. And I think the reason is that a lot of people thought that it was the original Robin that was getting killed, but he had already grown up to become Nightwing at this point. But my parents were actually really curious about it, so they took me to this comic book store that's no longer around in North Austin called Big State Comics, and we picked up that trade paperback. So that was my first comic, but at the same time that we did that, my dad, who was a big comic book fan when he was a kid, grabbed like 3 or 4 issues each of the current issues of Iron Man and Silver Surfer, because those were his favorite comics as a kid. And he wouldn't let me read them for the longest time, because he said they were his comics. And, meanwhile I had torn through Death in the Family, which really kind of an effed up thing to be your first superhero book, because, I mean, Robin gets mangled with a crowbar by the Joker. It's really graphic for the 80s. But finally he let me read Silver Surfer and Iron Man. And John, this will definitely stand out to you because you know the names, but this was the beginning of the Ron Lim Silver Surfer. And it was a lot of fun. Yeah. And it was also the Bob Layton post Armor Wars Iron Man.
Also a lot of fun.
Yeah, like it was just like the perfect storm of superhero comics for me to get into. And that just started this like whirlwind for my father and I, where we found this little comic book store kind of closer to home called Southside Comics, which is this little dive, and like the owner was always smoking, and it was very small and cramped, but that's where we started devouring like back issues for Iron Man and Silver Surfer, and slowly started adding to the pile with stuff like Darkhawk and handful of DC, but it was almost all Marvel. But really it was Iron Man, Silver Surfer, and then when I was 11, that's when they did X-Men #1, which was written by Chris Claremont and drawn by Jim Lee. And that was like a revelatory moment for me, because I remember opening the page, and it's like the first time I've seen Jim Lee's art. And there, like the second and third page is a splash page of Magneto in space. And my jaw dropped, and I was like, I had never seen anything like it before in my life. And I read that comic like cover to cover. And then I did it again, like about 4 or 5 times that evening, rereading it, but then just like poring over every line that Jim Lee had drawn. And I was like, I want to draw comic books for a living. And that was like the dream for years and years and years. That was a dream all the way through high school, until I realized that, comic book artists take anatomy and they draw like real stuff to get that good. And I always thought that it was just like, if you were a comic book artist, you just drew comic book stuff. And I never really practiced the fundamentals, so to speak. So I kind of ended up dropping that dream, but I kept with comics, and X-Men was the big thing, for a long time, because this is pre-X-Men movie where Wolverine was still just a secondary character, and it was an actual team book, and he wasn't in every single comic book in the Marvel Universe. Owns the place. Hate you, Logan. But yeah, so I stuck with comics for a really long time, through the death of Superman, through the launch of Image. That was a really big deal. Of course, I was still a huge Jim Lee fan. Got him to sign my copy of Wildcats #1 when I was 13 or 14. I couldn't speak to the man because I was just completely starstruck. But yeah, and then I don't really remember what happened. I think it was right around the time of the X-Men Onslaught story that I just kind of fell away from comics for a really long time until we started working at Game Fellas and we started selling comics in the secondary store. And I ended up getting really deep into DC at the time because Ed McGuinness was just killing it on Superman. And that kind of led me to some other stuff. And it also drew me to what I found to be my passion for comics for some reason, which is teenage superheroes. So my all-time favorite books, and this is kind of getting into my stories and our stuff, are ones starring teens that have to deal with being teenagers and superpowers. So of course X-Men hits that really hard, but also Invincible, Young Justice, Impulse, anything with a young team just really appeals to me for some reason. And I'm actually in the process of trying to get a complete run of Young Justice so that I can bind them into just a couple really big tomes, because the creative team of Young Justice was the same from beginning to end. It was Peter David and Todd Nauck for that entire run, with the couple issues that the artist took off. But I just thought that was really cool. I love the idea of creative teams sticking with books for long periods of time. And then I fell away from it again, and I didn't pick it back up with it until the New 52 a couple years ago. And I'm sad to say that DC's kind of squandered my enthusiasm for comics again in a couple years.
It's funny, so many of those moments. It's funny that everybody comes at it from a completely different place. You know what I mean? I'm a little bit older than Julian, but it's and I've read some of the stuff that he talked about, but it's my context for it was different.
Right.
And the same with Angelo's context as far as his approach to it, and it's funny to me that everybody's it's as similar as some of our interests are. It's interesting that even then everybody has their own entry points and things like that. You know what I mean? Nobody's everybody is a unique snowflake of geekdom. It's not like we're all listening to each other going, yeah, me too, yeah, me too, yeah, me too. It's everybody's is so different.
Yeah, and I think you and I, John, we definitely, we have a lot of similar tastes in comics, but at the same time, it's weird, right? Because I was really into Marvel when I first got into comics, but I didn't collect, Avengers or Thor or Fantastic Four, which I think are the big pillars of the Marvel Universe, and Spider-Man, of course. I didn't read any of that stuff. I was really content with Silver Surfer and Iron Man and Darkhawk, and it's specifically Silver Surfer because the cosmic stuff was so amazing to me. Because I felt that you just got to see new creatures and new aliens and new places in every issue, and it was great when he would run into the Impossible Man for some humor, because Silver Surfer was, he's notorious for having a stick up his butt. He's a really wordy introvert, or not introverted, but introspective character, and he's kind of always in his own head, so to speak. But
yeah,
stuff like the Impossible Man would be really cool when he would come down to Earth and stuff like that. I really enjoyed.
I definitely agree on the Silver Surfer, and because you can see a bunch of new characters, and that's actually the reason I don't like Space Marine video games or something like that, because I've already seen most of what it can offer. But if you just pick up the Silver Surfer, like I did when I was little too, you see all these things that you never would have imagined, or at least you don't think you imagined them.
Yeah. And to that end, Angelo, because I know you're a science fiction buff, I'm going to recommend to you 2 volumes, which, pick up at a used bookstore or something, or whatever. But, especially since, I know you've watched the Avengers and stuff, and you're leading towards this story arc.
Yeah.
But pick up Silver Surfer, it's a trade paperback, it's Silver Surfer, The Return of Thanos. Or Thanos. I always said Thanos as a kid, and now I hear Thanos, whatever. But pick up that, and then pick up the Infinity Gauntlet, which is one of the, most, lauded story arcs that Marvel did in the 90s. Because one, I just think that those Silver Surfer books are incredible, but two, the Infinity Gauntlet, like John was saying with Secret Wars, it gives you such a huge cross-section of the Marvel Universe that you can kind of go from there and be like, oh, well, you know what? I kind of wanted to, like, see more of this guy. Okay. I was gonna say comics are to a point now where, you know, you don't have to pick up the ongoings. I think if anything, Marvel is marketing specifically towards people like you because they end and relaunch their books like every 6 to 12 months now. They don't really keep them going very long anymore.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, but
now I don't
when
have
they have books in Marvel, I can't really understand what's happening. Like, I stopped reading, well, I didn't even try to read the Avengers big events, like, with Infinity, because I read the first one and I was like, I had no idea what's happening.
Well, and I think that John and I have had conversations about this for years, but there's been a shift in the last, like, 10 years where writers are writing for the trade now.
Well, Hickman definitely does. Hickman definitely does. And Hickman used Avengers and New Avengers as the foundation for Infinity. So if you weren't reading his work in those other two books, then you were already starting Infinity at a disadvantage. Hickman's one of the few writers who still writes in a very decompressed style. Not the biggest guy. I'm sure his stuff reads better in trades, but yeah.
That's where I started with him. That's actually why I like it, because he does have that scope, and I don't know. So I could see how coming from your angle, like of reading like the monthlies or something, would be sort of problematized because you don't get to see it all at once.
Yeah, and he's also, like I talked earlier about, I'm not a plot guy. I'm a character interaction guy. And Hickman is very much a plot guy to me. He's very, very interested in the specifics of an intricate plot. And the character stuff is secondary to him. So just in regards to taste, he's not really my taste either. He also wastes a lot of space, if I can criticize him. There's a lot of Hickman books I've picked up where he'll do the one black page with one single word on it and, like, kind of repeat that over and over as, like, a dramatic effect, like a title card for a movie. That works in film because you're looking at it for a second. If you've got a 22-page comic and you use 8 of those 22 pages to put a single word on it, that's not, like...
That would tick me off.
Laughable to me. And that's something, that's like a Hickmanism. That's something he does a lot. And I'm not the biggest fan of it, so.
Yeah, his style can work. It works in, like, the Manhattan Projects. I didn't realize he did it in, like, everything, though.
Yeah, like, it's one of his trademarks.
You know, I think a lot, too, you mentioned characters. I think I do enjoy characters. You can have a really great character in a comic book and a decent plot, and I'll be bored. But if you have a cast of well-written characters, and the biggest part is, if they play off each other really well, that will suck me right in.
Yeah.
I will be completely enthralled by characters that are just, you know, you can almost see somebody who has a great mind for this sitting there and arranging these characters like pieces on a chessboard so that they'll interact with each other in a certain way to a particular end. And if I see something like that happen, I fall in love with it. So I'm not totally a plot guy, but I'm just like, in that one case where something like that is going on, plot can go ahead and take a back seat as long as there's a good plot going on. You know, it's got an arc happening. But I don't care as much about that. That can be the freaking, you know, what do they call that thing? Like the hero story or whatever that the generic arc is for that. Right. The most bland thing in the world. But if the characters interacting is done well, I'll get drawn right into that. So.
Yeah.
I'm sort of like in a mindset where I need them to have that for that end to be really strong, because otherwise I won't, like, be able to justify the means to myself or something. Like, I'll be like, why are these characters really there? Even if they're placed really well, like, it has to be for a purpose. So that always makes most important for me, but I can see how it wouldn't be as important in a superhero comic, especially because that you're going for, like, for the character specifically, because that is the one you're following. And, like, those kind of stories are really they really only go so far as their characters, because a superhero can only be as, like, worthwhile as his supervillain. I think Stan Lee said something like that. That's the only way you can make a good story, is if there's, like, a good obstacle to overcome.
And I find it so interesting because, just noting how much comics have changed recently because I've also been reading. I just finished it actually. Volume 2 of the Essential X-Men, which these are Marvel's black and white, huge continuity blocks. It's like about 2 years worth of comic book in each one. It's a really good value. And so I'm reading like the Chris Claremont, John Byrne X-Men stuff from like 78 to 80. And during this time are two of like the biggest X-Men stories that people talk about today, which are the Dark Phoenix saga and X-Men Days of Future Past, which is what the upcoming movie is based on. And I found it so interesting that like the Dark Phoenix saga is something that they start like 12 issues in advance. There's just this little hint of it. And meanwhile, they're going on adventure after adventure, and there's some downtime in there as well, where they introduce Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat. And then you start to get a little bit more of the Dark Phoenix saga, but the actual Dark Phoenix story is only about 3 issues long. But they've been building on it for years because, you know, when they actually brought her back as Phoenix, that was like 2 years prior. And same thing with Days of Future Past, where that's like this pivotal moment where people always talk about it and they always go back to it, and that's why they're making a movie based on it. It's 2 issues.
And the thing is, Julian, as well, like, I think what you get, especially in the lead up to Dark Phoenix, is you get these issues where characters may only talk about it for like a panel or two. They may say, hey, what's the deal with Jean? I don't know. And then it's like, that's the way that the subplot is handled, you know, and that's all that there is.
Yeah.
But it's there, you know, and it exists month to month. Now, the Days of Future Past thing, when I read it recently because of the film, the one thing I found really interesting is that it really has to be thought of in the context of the time, because now we have previews. So we know 3 months out, 4 months out, what comics are coming, what they're basically going to be about, you know, what the gist is. It's hard to pull off surprises anymore in the way that it was when Days of Future Past came out. And I think why Days of Future Past is such a classic is that if you were buying X-Men month to month and you pick up that issue opens like a cold opening. You're going, what in the world is going on? Like,
oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're like, wait, Wolverine is old and all the X-Men are dead, and that's the way that issue opens. And there's been no hype for it. There's been no preview solicitation for it. There's been no websites telling you that this is coming. So when you open up that issue of X-Men, you're like, well, wait a minute. And so those 2 issues in the context of the time, I think, become something way, way different than what they are now. And it's difficult because now we hear, like, I didn't read it at the time. I only read it for the first time just maybe 6-7 months ago. And the deal is, like, it's hard to think about that because you think, okay, this is a classic X-Men story, and you read it and you go, okay, that's fine. Like, it's good. You know what I mean? But it's like, well, why is it a classic? And then when you stop to think about why it's a classic, I mean, it would have been really, really cool to experience in that context of just buying it off the rack and going, like, what in the world is going on?
John, I totally agree with, like, how you say it would be cool to experience it that way. So, like, what I do is, like, even though I get previews and I could access the internet, is I know the titles I'm going to be pulling. I just don't read anything about them and, like, don't look at it and just make that my first experience. So it's like, for me at least, it's like kind of an unwritten rule that I, like, don't look into the Pandora's box or whatever.
I do that with the comic book movies. So I watch the trailers and that's it. So I went into Thor 2 with like really low expectations, and I love the movie. It might be my top 3 Marvel movies, but the ending credit scene, you know, because there's always a bit after the credits or during the credits, like made me want to wet my pants because I was not expecting a character that obscure. I'm not going to spoil it here, but the character that they show, I never thought would be in a Marvel movie, and my jaw dropped, and I was just like, oh my god! So I get that with the movies, if not the comics.
I think there's something. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Angelo.
I think there's something to surprise, even in, you know, like I said, I haven't read many comic books, but even when I'm playing a game, you know, that stuff that comes out of left field, the hook that you didn't see coming, that's all of a sudden snags you, BioShock, you know, stuff like that, where there's a twist, and all of a sudden you're surprised by something, and the game takes a turn that you didn't expect, or even on a lighter note, like when I decided I was going to play Tales of Vesperia for the first time, I was like, okay, here we go. I'm expecting, you know, bland, kind of typical anime stuff. And then about maybe an hour into the game, I'm starting to realize, these characters are pretty interesting. And then the banter starts between them, and then more characters get thrown in, and then they start playing off each other, and then there's like more interaction and more banter, and you're realizing that you're playing a very bland, very tropey anime story, but what's happening is the writing. Well, I can't even say the writing, because even the way they were acted and the way they were the lines they were given weren't that fantastic. But just the types of characters they were, put in the situations they were in, and the dialogue they were having with each other, just sort of made me think, wow, this is really something special. And I didn't see it coming. It kind of just surprised me and just kind of appeared there, and I was like, wow, okay, so this is what the gem of this game is. And, I don't know, I like whenever something like that happens, whenever either it's through, an air of mystery that you're not really sure, where you're building up a story arc through a subplot that all of a sudden drops in like 3 issues, like you were talking about the Phoenix Saga. And I know I just said that wrong, but whatever. Or you're talking about something where you just open it and just like a punch in the gut, like, what is this? I didn't see this coming. Surprises make things way more valuable and way more memorable and way more worth remembering than just, stuff that you've seen before, or even something great that is coming isn't that great because it's coming, so.
Right. Well, let's throw out some recommendations for Angelo real quick before we move on. Patrick and John, I did mine.
If I was telling Angelo to check out something on the shelves right now, I would say Saga Volume 1. It's an international bestseller. It's a sci-fi fantasy series about a couple of warring aliens who are on opposite sides of the war. They have a baby together, and it puts them on the run because it's not kosher for them to be having kids together.
Okay.
It's funny. It's hugely imaginative. It's adult in the way that it deals with sex and relationships. It's a truly great book, and you can get the first volume for like $10. I would be surprised if you do pick it up and read it. I'd be surprised that you didn't love it. It's really, really great.
I'm gonna go in a completely different direction and just say like a graphic novel, because I've already recommended or just rattled off a few monthlies, but I think Abelard is a really good graphic novel that came out a couple of months ago, and it's about like this little bird who has a top hat it's too big for his own good. I may have mentioned this on one other episode, but he is trying to find out how to fly, and he's heard that there's this mythic place called America where they have just learned how to fly, and so he's trying to travel there, but it's about his journey and the people he affects along the way.
That sounds neat. I remember before you were mentioning something. I mentioned this before in another podcast, and I'm going to write it down this time so I don't forget. You were talking about this weird mermaid book you were reading too, comic thing.
Oh, The Wake. Love that.
Wake.
Yeah, The Wake's great. The Wake is like if James Cameron did a Creature from the Black Lagoon remake.
That sounds fantastic.
It's so cool. And it's only 10 issues long, so it has a definite end. I think it's right in the middle right now. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just brooding right now, and I can't wait till the next time I go to pull my comics because it's gonna be there, and a whole merman army kind of thing is. I don't know what they're gonna do.
So there we have some really interesting suggestions to kind of run the gamut. And of course, I would love to hear some listeners give Angelo some pointers on books that he should check out if he gets the chance, and just favorites of you out there in the listening world or something.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm
always open to suggestions too, because I love to get people to tell me what to read, and if I like it, then I can identify with them better. So me too.
Definitely. But this is a video game podcast, damn it. So what we're going to do is take a break real quick, and then we're going to come back and talk about video games based on comic books. So, here we go.
Zoo time, Michigan, new time, the mammals are your favorite time, you're running water tonight. Heartbeat, increase in heartbeat, you hear the thunder of stampeding rhinos in
Okay, so we're back. And I thought that the way to talk about video games based on superheroes without getting into an hour-long discussion about how awesome Batman Arkham Asylum was is to kind of take it from time periods. So we're going to do the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and the Modern Age. Now that's a comic book thing, and it references, like, you know, the focal points of creativity. Or the Golden Age was when, like, the superheroes were being made, and then the Silver Age was when they were kind of coming into their own. That's not going to really correspond to the video games because, you know, Golden Age here, I'm talking about like Atari to the 16-bit days. There's not a lot of good examples in that time period.
I probably played them all.
Yeah, I think most of us did.
There's some pretty definitive ones, though.
Like what?
Well, you do know Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started as a comic book, right?
Yeah, I almost was going to say, because I actually don't hate the first Ninja Turtles game as much as most people do.
Oh, I don't either. I loved it. I
love
didn't
it.
even know what the Ninja Turtles were when I saw that game, and I went out and bought it anyway. It's fantastic. I think it's fantastic. I'm kind of a big apologist for that game, I guess.
I'm a huge Turtles fan. I play like all of them.
Yeah.
But you didn't want to pull your hair out with the underwater stuff and then try to figure out the overworld? And
Dude, I would get there all the time when I was young, and I was so mad. I thought I was just bad.
I would always sacrifice Raphael in the water world, and then win him back in the next stage.
Man, Raphael's
way to rescue him there. Yeah, he was terrible. He had no range.
Yeah.
But the music was fantastic. I mean, seriously, that was another thing too. If you look at the 8-bit era, I can't talk much about the Atari 2600 because, like I mentioned before, I kind of missed that. I had a ColecoVision because of where I live. So, but my goodness, I mean, there was an 8-bit, the Silver Surfer game for the NES.
Oh God!
Wait! It's freaking terrible. Okay, I'm gonna get that out there right now. It's freaking terrible. But I knew a guy that owned it, and the music is mind blowing. It's like some of the best 8-bit chiptune music you will ever hear in your life.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
My most hardcore gaming story, and Julian has heard me tell this many times, one of my most hardcore gaming stories is that I have beat the NES Silver Surfer.
Why?
Because that's what you did with the games, Angelo.
Yeah, because when you ask for a game for, like, a gift or whatever, you get it, and it's like, that's the one you got, you know, and it's like, whether, you know, that's the one you have to deal with, so you play it.
No, I know.
Yeah, when I was really little, that's what it was like for me, too. Unfortunately, I missed ColecoVision and that stuff because I wasn't born yet, but but I definitely got, like, one title, and that had to hold me over from Christmas to Easter.
Yeah.
Early stuff like Superman for Atari 2600 and Spider-Man for Atari 2600, like, you have those licensed superhero stuff, and it's like, and I think this was the case for me probably through my whole, like, gaming life, is like, I want them to be good, and I want to try every single one of them, and then it's very rare that I actually like one. Like, going back even to those days, because I remember my friend would have Superman, and we'd be like, oh, let's play Superman, and it's the Superman Atari 2600 game was terrible. You're, like, assembling a bridge? It's so bad. You know, but yet, I don't know, I can't think of another gaming genre that, like, I've consistently gone back to again and again, only to be met with disappointment.
Well, especially during those early days, right? Because they really preyed on our love of a licensed property. And LJN was like the grand offender. Because I truly feel that the X-Men game for NES is one of the worst games I've ever played, period. But if we're talking about based on a comic book, it fails doubly because, like, every character is this little hunchback that can either punch with a stubby fist or fire some sort of weird beam that's like 2 pixels long, that does nothing. And then Wolverine for the NES was almost as bad because when he uses his claws, he loses health constantly, but they never have, like, his healing factor in there at all. And it has the most random collection of characters that help him out, like Jubilee and Havoc.
Jubilee, like, really?
Yeah, well, Jubilee actually makes a little more sense than Havoc, because he always kind of finds, like, the young girl on the X-Men and he befriends her. So he's had, like, it was Shadowcat, then it was Jubilee, and then later on, I don't know, I stopped reading, but there was another one. But holy crap, those games, those LGN games. But you know, it's funny because I do think, and I don't know how, but somehow Batman got like just the greatest thing, you know, in video games in like those early days, because I feel that the two Sunsoft games for NES, the Batman game based on the Tim Burton movie, and then Return of the Joker, I thought were fantastic games. And then even the beat 'em up on the Super Nintendo, based on Batman Returns, was a pretty excellent beat 'em up.
He had some amazing games on the Genesis as well. I didn't get a chance to play them, but I have seen some YouTube videos of Let's Plays and stuff like that. And I wish I was I wish I had a better knowledge of the Sega Genesis, but one of those Batman games, just like this is happening, it's mind-blowing what it's doing on a Sega Genesis. It's really, really good.
I wish I would have had that experience because I was a big Genesis guy, and my friend had, one of my best friends had Genesis also, but he had Batman Forever.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That one was the bad one.
Yeah.
I had the regular Batman game. As a matter of fact, the first Genesis games that I had, I think, were all superhero games. Like, I besides Sonic, I had the Spider-Man game,
I love
the Batman
that game.
and I had the Superman game that was based on the arcade with the weird side-scrolling Superman game as well.
Wait, the Genesis version of Superman is based on that?
Yeah.
Holy crap, I need that.
Did you not know that?
No, I didn't know that. That arcade Superman game is one of my all-time favorite cabinets from when I was a kid. I used to play that all the time at the Pizza Hut down from my house. I thought it was so cool.
It's a variation of it. It's not exactly the same, but it's very, very similar. It's a side-scrolling, sort of a weird quasi. It's like you shoot and you also occasionally punch, and you go left to right. But yeah, it was definitely kind of like, you know, Strider NES and Strider Arcade. It was definitely like the Superman Genesis and the Superman Arcade were cut from the same cloth. You know, similar enough that you could tell that they shared the same roots. The Spider-Man game was actually, like, thinking back on it, was pretty innovative because you actually incorporated photo taking into it, where like Parker had to buy his web fluid. So you would have to like take photos, and you got more money if you took a photo of like a boss character.
I remember that.
And Venom wasn't in the game as like a villain, but he would swing through, and if you were able to catch a picture of Venom, you would get like all this money.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that game was, you know, that was a really good early. That's probably the first Marvel game that was really good.
Spider-Man did all right too, actually, come to think of it, in video games.
Oh yeah, I think Spider-Man 2 was like a watermark in superhero games, but that's not until the next era.
Yeah, because I would say like his NES and Super Nintendo offerings weren't all that great.
Really?
But that Genesis game was pretty fantastic.
But before I forget, the Genesis game that I'm talking about for Batman is The Adventures of Batman and Robin. And
Oh, okay.
the reason I remember is because I remember the publisher had the coolest name. It was called Clockwork Tortoise was the name of the developer. That just stuck in my head because it's a unique name. So,
And Angelo, you being a big music buff, you should do yourself a favor and try to seek out the music from the Sega CD version of Batman Returns.
oh yeah,
Our mutual boss, John and I, at Gamefellas, he would put the Sega CD, or he would put that in his CD player because it was Redbook audio, and we would listen to the soundtrack after we would close. That was probably before John's time, but it's a fantastic soundtrack.
I may have heard that. I want to say I watched a Let's Play of that as well. The game itself was kind of... Wait, I don't know. Which one was the one where it was basically like a flying or driving game, and it had cutscenes to it?
Sega CD one? Game, well, it was a side-scrolling action game, but then there was also some flying and driving parts. Okay. But it was mostly a side-scroller.
The one I'm thinking of was like crazy hard, too.
It was a pretty hard game.
Maybe this is it then. I remember...
Actually, a lot of those superhero games in those early days I thought were pretty darn tough.
They didn't hand it to you. But yeah, speaking of music, the Super Nintendo game Maximum Carnage, you guys play that one?
No, I wanted to. It was like advertised on TV, and my mom wouldn't let me get it.
You should.
I have played it.
It's a brawler. It's a really good brawler too, in my opinion. It came in a really cool cartridge. The cartridge was actually red. But the coolest part, the music nerd of me likes, was the band that did the soundtrack was called Green Jelly. They went on to become a band that you're probably familiar with. They actually are Tool now.
Oh!
So, if you want some interesting, kind of look at some of their early work, pick up or play Maximum Carnage and you'll get that.
I totally traveled to Tennessee from Chicago just to see them. Well, I mean, it was at Bonnaroo, but like I learned a lot of their songs by heart. I love him. James Keenan.
Oh, goodness. Their drummer is insane. I don't know how he thinks. Like, it takes me effort to figure out how to count his songs, much less play them.
Yeah, man. Zombie, the way that thing starts.
Yeah, all of them. All of them. A lot of his songs have really weird time signatures. There's one where, we're going to digress here, but there's one song where it actually counts down. It goes from, I forget how many beats a measure. It's like 14 beats a measure to 13 beats a measure to 12 beats a measure. And it's like, a friend of mine taught me how to count, and I'm like, that's insane, and it's so cool, because it actually sounds really good when they play it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Danny Carey is their drummer. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think, obviously, like, in this early time, especially in the arcade, it was a lot of brawlers, and, on the Super Nintendo, I actually did think that the X-Men Mutant Genesis was really good by Capcom, because you actually had, some Street Fighter-style special moves in there. But, I remember in the arcade, and I told myself that I liked these games at the time, but I was wrong, because they were terrible. But there was the Captain America and the Avengers.
Oh.
With these short little squatty characters, and Captain America talking like this. Wasp.
Did you play the home part?
I did play the home part.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
They did that. I'll give them credit though. They got the voice sampling in there somehow.
Oh, that's
I played the heck out of that game. I played the heck out of it at arcades. I played the heck out of it on my Genesis. You know, and it's kind of funny because I didn't play the NES version until I was grown, and the NES version was actually really cool. It was like a different game. It was like a side-scrolling action-adventure game. It played a little bit like the G.I. Joe game from that same company. It wasn't a brawler at all. But man, I think if you were to clock my hours spent on superhero video games, I probably spent more time on Captain America and the Avengers than any of the others.
But how many quarters did you spend?
Hard to say. I'll still play it now. Like if I see it somewhere, I'll still play it now. I've thought about buying a machine before. I've seen them for a couple $100. They're not particularly expensive machines, and it's one that would be on my short list of ones I'd want in my home. I've spent a lot of time, and it's funny because there's ones that are way better. I mean, heck, even the upright Spider-Man game, the one that plays very similar, that has Namor and Black Cat. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I was about to bring that one up as, the complete, opposite of, style from Captain America, because Captain America has, these little squatty characters. and then the Spider-Man one, they're all super tall and lanky. And why do you have Namor in anything?
Who was the fourth character in that? Can you remember?
Vision.
It was Black...
Wait, no, it wasn't Vision.
No, it was Black Cat, Namor, Spider-Man. I thought there was one more character.
I think there was, and I cannot for the life of me remember who it was. Oh, Hawkeye.
Was it Hawkeye?
I'm pretty sure it was Hawkeye.
I think you're right.
And Venom, turned into, a giant, King Kong-sized monster. It's a really weird game. So weird.
Yeah, even though the Spider-Man one was quote unquote better, I don't know what it was about that Avengers game. I think part of it was just the nerdiness of seeing those characters in a video game for the first time. Like, thank you, Wonder Man, and he flies by, and all these obscure Masters of Evil, and these more obscure Marvel characters. You know, I don't know if that was what the appeal was, but there was something about it that I've played that one more than I've played. You know, everybody considers the X-Men beat 'em up a classic, but I played the heck out of the Adventures one.
And I played the X-Men one a ton, and I recently played it in the past year and beat it at my friend's house. But if I'm not mistaken, you can't beat Hawkeye, right?
In the Avengers one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Hawkeye, Iron Man, Vision, and Captain America.
Yeah.
So he's double duty. Somehow. I think I would probably prefer to own the X-Men cabinet if I had my choice. It has so many fond memories for me, but also I would want the 6-player 2-screen.
I was going to say.
Yeah. which would be a nightmare to maintain.
I have only seen one 6-player cabinet of that. The one they had in the mall when I was a kid was a 4-player, and that was fine. But once I saw the 6-player, I was like, I have just found a shrine to the video game gods. This thing is amazing.
That's so funny. Because here it was the opposite. It was like every arcade had the 6-player.
Oh, really?
And then I found like one 4-player at a supermarket. I was like, this is dumb. Why is it only one screen?
Nah. Well, the mall we went
sorry.
The mall we went to was always like we went to the smaller of the 2 malls in the area because the bigger one was further away. I think the bigger one might have had that, but I just didn't see it. So.
Yeah. So not a lot to talk about in the golden age, aka like the Atari to 16-bit days. But I do think that going from like 32-bit to the end of like the PlayStation 2 era. What's that, John?
I just thinking about like, I mean, I was still buying these games like sight unseen, just off the rack. Like I remember doing it with Fantastic Four for PlayStation. Just oh my god. Like, there's a Fantastic Four game, I have to have it, and buying it, like, immediately. Like, as soon as I possibly could. And it was terrible. It was
I was like that with
terrible.
the Genesis for X-Men. I just, like, didn't have a concept of good versus bad games. I just thought these were games that had these things in it, and it was going to be good no matter what.
Well, at least the X-Men games of Genesis were competent and pretty close to the source material. Fantastic Four on the PlayStation was like, I don't know what that was. But it was the opposite of good.
It had jazz music. The music for that game was like real jazz music, like not video game music, but like guys noodling around on saxophones while like Human Torch is like beating people up.
Elevator music.
Really, yeah, it's so bad. It's such a bad game, and yet there it was, the 90s, and I hadn't been burned enough. I'm still going and shelling out, money for these bad superhero video games.
There has to be a name for that condition.
I don't know. And it finally broke me. I think that's, a lot of the Batman stuff comes out now and they're huge sellers, and I kind of sit back and wait. So I think, as far as I go, like, it definitely my buying habits have changed. I was finally broken of it, and that may have been with my interest in Aquaman for GameCube.
Sorry.
Oh.
I was like, I couldn't believe that they made an Aquaman game. It was to me like out of all the characters, like it was just so weird to make like for someone to invest the time in making like a big open sandbox style undersea Aquaman game. It's really, really boring and not very good. And I think that was sort of where I wouldn't even call it a love affair. My masochism of like going and like trying to play these terrible games. I think that's where it finally like wore off.
And that's so funny because I do think that this was the area where we started to get a handful of really good superhero games. Because there was stuff like the Spider-Man games on the PlayStation 1, which were really solid. I really enjoyed, the Wolverine game for, the PlayStation 2 era. That was the one where Mark Hamill was playing Wolverine, and it was kind of a pseudo-stealth game. It was kind of janky, but at the same time, like, it had some really good elements to it, and I really enjoyed that. Like, it wasn't awful. Like, the problem with a lot of the superhero stuff was that they would try to tie it in with, like, movie releases and stuff, so they were really rushed pieces of crap. But every once in a while, you would get something that they just did to make a superhero game, and I think those were the ones that ended up being pretty good. But I mean, I would rather play Superman 64 than Aquaman. And that's the one that I was talking about, where Superman 64, that's like the go-to for everybody saying, like, the worst superhero game ever made. But people loved that game. Kids loved that game. And at least, I can kind of see where they were coming from as far as, like, trying to do, like, a Star Fox thing, and it kind of made sense in the storyline because he's stuck in a computer. Like, it wasn't good, like, for, the discerning gamer, but for a kid, like, it was quite, quite the popular game.
Sufficient.
Yeah.
I think everybody's still waiting for that, like, good Superman game. It's like, going back to talk about the Atari 2600, it's like everybody is still waiting for that game that makes them feel like they're awesomely powerful Superman, and they have these games that it seems like every 3 or 4 years, like there's another Superman game that comes out that is, unloved.
Yeah, and Well, actually, I will say real quick that the Superman animated game that came out for, like, the PlayStation 2 was pretty good. But, Patrick had wanted to do this at the end, and, John, you might have to leave us a little early, but he wanted to talk about, like, superhero games that we wish we could see. And the thing that I want most is a game that stars a flying superhero that's done really, really well. And I think that part of the problem has been that the tech has just not been there before. So I'm kind of hoping that next gen gives me like a Superman or an Iron Man game or a Thor game where it takes place in a really massive area, a la Grand Theft Auto 5 or something, where I can really explore in the air. Cause like Saints Row 4 gets you so tantalizingly close to full on flight, and then they just don't do it. And it's the most frustrating thing because it feels like it's there in the engine, somewhere in the code, but they just didn't implement it. And, you know, as such, you just have to be content with super jumping into the air and then gliding for long periods of time. But if you could give me some lift and thrust in there, I'd be like the happiest gamer. And that's all I want. I just want like a really good flying superhero game. I don't feel that's too much to ask for.
Yeah, the power of flight is like one of the most sought after in those lists of people who say like, if I could only have one superpower, that's what it would be. So I totally understand.
Yeah, you know, I really want, and it has to be like really good flight, like good controls, but also a good sense of like speed and inertia to make it really feel like you're doing it.
Yeah, man, for a while, like the one superhero I wanted to be was Angel because I was like, he has the one thing I want to do the most. Flight.
Oh, okay, I thought maybe, you know, because he was rich and beautiful, like all of the ladies. You wanted to do that.
No, man.
I think I feel like a lot of the itch got scratched as well with the excellent, like X-Men Legends and Marvel Ultimate Alliance games. Like being able to play as like basically any major Marvel character and see like a pretty good manifestation of their powers and their different costumes and things like that. I think those games really did fans like a real service and really showed the potential in the universe for those games. So if it's hard for me to think of like what I would still want to see because I've played the beat 'em ups and I've played like sort of a loose RPG. I'd like to see something that plays more similar to Mass Effect where you actually have conversations and make like decisions affect outcome and things like that. But then I start to wonder, like, I don't think you could use like a licensed property because if you want characters to say, you know, you want them to die off, or, you know, your character, if you control your character's morality, then it can't really be like, you know, Spider-Man. Do you know what I mean? So it makes me wonder if there's room, you know, I know there's been stuff like Infamous and things like that, but I'd almost like to see someone attempt like a Mass Effect style, superhero game.
Oh, my nerd boner. He's so big right now.
John, here's how I would do it for Spider-Man, though. Like, if you go down one morality route, you would be amazing, and if you go down another, you would be superior.
You could do that now. I mean, you really could, or you could even do it where you become more susceptible to becoming Venom. You know, you could split it that way. But I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's the character that I would want to see that with or not. You know, I think about how Mass Effect has like support teams and things like that, and it's like, would you play, say, an X-Men game where you get to choose which mutants are the ones that are part of your team or whatever, you know? But then everything ends up sounding to me sort of like Marvel Ultimate Alliance, but it's like, I don't necessarily just want to play that all over again. I'd like the superhero games we've gotten every single kind of superhero game except for one where you really have a strong investment in the story. And I think that's what I'd like to see next.
Yeah, there's even an RTS one. I think it's like free on like AdultSwim.com or something, like, or a Cartoon Network or something. Like the kids I was teaching were playing it 2 years ago, so I know that's definitely true. And when I see that, I'm like, all right, they've been everywhere, almost. You know,
we're talking about superheroes, but in terms of comic book games, I mean, Walking Dead, I've heard is a great comic book game, and it's easy. It's easy for us to get sidetracked with, like, you know, talking about the guys with the capes on, but Walking Dead may be that type of story-based, decision-based experience that I'm looking for, you know, and I've heard they've got a game based on Fables that's coming out. Fables is another good comic.
Wolf Among Us.
So those may be the ones I need to play next.
Yeah, John, Fables is actually the one I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but like, the problem is it's like a Telltale game, so I think it's going to be like basically like story oriented and it's not very open, and I think Fables would be more suited to like an open world. But the other one, The Walking Dead, I definitely played, and the only problem with it is there's like lots of hiccups in the coding, so sometimes it crashes or whatever, but the game itself is amazing.
Yeah.
So,
No comment.
Yeah, right, Julian?
No comment.
I met you halfway, Julian, which means John's incredible enthusiasm and your absolute hatred.
But real quick, John, going back to your idea, I think that you almost hit it on the head and you didn't realize it, because I think that X-Men is the one that you do it with. Because you could almost have it be like, well, do you want your team to be the late 70s Cyclops team with the do-gooders, or do you want to be like the late 2000s X-Force team with Wolverine and the black and
your
red?
Morality aligns with either Professor X or Magneto.
Yeah. Well, and they kind of...
God.
See, I think they kind of did that with X-Men Destiny, but that was, of course, with shovelware that, you know, it was like a merc job by Silicon Knights to try to make some quick money. So you can't... you can just throw that game out and just start over.
Yeah.
But I think X-Men is the one that you do it with. Because there's so many characters that run the gamut of morality. And that's the thing and that's the thing that like some of the better BioWare games do, is that you have your characters in your party that are like completely good, probably pretty evil, and then everything in between. So you kind of have like this nice little selection to go through, and depending on how you play, certain characters are going to like you more than others.
Man, what if depending on how you play, you start like looking more like that kind of character, and then at the end you're like a hodgepodge of all of them?
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was saying, was like, you know, going into like the X-Force that they did a few years ago, where it was like Wolverine and Psylocke, and everybody was wearing like gray and black.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they were basically doing like wetworks jobs, like kind of, I didn't read it, but it was like, I think unbeknownst to Cyclops. Like this, like totally like underground stuff. So yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I was thinking also like if you make like intelligent but evil decisions, all of a sudden your head becomes gigantic like Brainiac or something.
Well, real quick before we move out of the Silver Age, I just want to throw out that I think Ultimate Spider-Man for the PlayStation 2 is one of my all-time favorite superhero games. I just want to throw that out there. I think it's fantastic. I think it's one of the best translations of a comic book to video game, as far as like the pacing and the dialogue and also the graphics, because they did something on the PlayStation 2 that I didn't think they could do, because they made it look like a comic book come to life. It was really awesome. But you guys, any other quick hits from like the Silver Age, which is, as I'm saying, is from like, you know, 32-bit to the last generation? Any standouts at all?
Spider-Man 2, man. Like, definitely that's the watermark, I think, of that generation. First open world game.
Yeah.
Superhero.
A lot of people love Spider-Man 2, and it's just, for me, I just love the style of Ultimate more. But Spider-Man 2 is a great game, definitely.
Yeah.
I think for me, probably like the X-Men Legends series, probably the second one, you know, it ended up opening up into Marvel Ultimate Alliance, but that one was one that I thought was, at the time, like, man, I wished all superhero games were like that.
Yeah, you got really hardcore into that one, too. Like, I was actually surprised at how much you were digging it.
Yeah, just the variety of characters and abilities and things, so it just got really addicted to it.
Yeah.
No one's really mentioned this, and I feel like you gotta at least mention it because of, like, the scope of, like, how popular the game got, but, like, on, I think, PlayStation or PlayStation 2 was the first time Marvel vs. Capcom came to the console, and that became maybe like the biggest superhero game like that there ever was. Like, everyone was playing that.
Yeah, I think I kind of fell off of the Versus games by Marvel vs. Capcom 2, but I gotta say that, and I did want to mention at some point that, you know, the Capcom Marvel fighting games I thought were all just amazing. You know, it started with X-Men, and then, you know, Marvel Superheroes I thought was incredible, especially the fact that they were able to work in the Infinity Gauntlet into the storyline, and you had like the different power gems. So that was definitely some good stuff. Angelo?
What?
Or did you have any standouts from this generation?
Oh, from that particular one? No, not really. Not really, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Well, I guess we'll just move on into the modern age.
Do it. I'm all going to talk about Arkham Asylum and City. That's it.
See, I want to avoid, let's talk about the games that we liked that weren't Batman Arkham games, because I feel that kind of just skews the
Just quickly,
thing.
I want to say that Batman Arkham City is my favorite Batman story ever told. That's it.
Wow, okay.
I actually preferred Asylum, but okay. I did.
I mean, maybe the combat, but like the story, dude.
Yeah, I gotta say,
the
ending of Arkham City.
I haven't finished
Pretty
Arkham City.
fantastic.
Okay, so that's why. All right, go. Forget that. Forget I said anything.
Nope.
Oh boy.
I'd say, I mean, obviously, like, Arkham Asylum is like the game for me, superhero-wise this time. But I gotta go along with John. I mean, I really had a ton of fun with the 2 Marvel Ultimate Alliance games. I played the hell out of those things. I really enjoyed, like, especially pulling together, like, classic teams. So I was so happy on the first Ultimate Alliance when I had Thor, Captain America, Hulk, and Iron Man. Yeah, in their classic suits. And that was, like, my team through the whole game, because I was just like, oh yes, this is so nostalgic and I love it.
It was just a redemption of, like, all those bad games you'd played with all those characters individually. It was sort of like, oh, finally, like, this makes up for the bad Fantastic Four game and the bad Avengers game and the bad Spider-Man game. And, it's like, it was like by having them all in there in one good game, it was sort of like it made amends.
Yeah, definitely. And I enjoyed the second one a lot too. Although once I got Phoenix, it kind of broke the game for me because she's just way overpowered. And it was basically just pressing one button to annihilate everything on the screen constantly.
Well, she kind of should be.
Yeah, that's true. But, I'm trying to think. I mean, there's been a lot of superhero games this gen, but they kind of all get overshadowed by Batman.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad. We got Superman Returns. That wasn't good.
I hate to say it, I didn't play anything but
Finally,
Batman games this gen.
Deadpool game.
What was that, Patrick?
Finally, there was a good Deadpool game, but it was just mediocre.
Yeah, I mean, at least he got a game. I mean, that's kind of a testament to how popular that character's become, because Deadpool is kind of like the last bastion of breakout Marvel characters. Really, because now, and John and I have talked about this just in our, personal time, but nobody wants to make new characters anymore because they're not going to get anything out of it personally. So what you end up getting are iterations of existing characters. So that's why you have Red Hulk and Red She-Hulk and Kid Gladiator, because nobody wants to make anything new.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, from what I heard about that game, though, it was successful in that, in a Deadpool character game, it was successful. But just as far as playing the game wasn't so great. But yeah, Deadpool was great.
It's like a perfect example of, if you're a fan of the source material.
Yeah.
Mm. But speaking of Hulk, I think this might be the end of the last era we were talking about, but the Hulk Ultimate Destruction bears mentioning. I know people who don't even like the Hulk, they kind of like that game.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of how we got Prototype, in a roundabout way, because it was the same team. I played the demo, I didn't really care for it, but I know a lot of people love it, so I'm not going to say anything bad about it.
I had the same experience. I can totally see why somebody would get sucked into that game. It didn't grab me, but I could see why it would grab somebody,
So why do you think it is that all three of us felt the same way?
Well, when I played the demo, it felt like playing Rampage in the arcade, and I love Rampage, but it felt like there are a bajillion things trying to take you down simultaneously, and you just can't keep up. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't very fun for me. But, I'm actually finding myself hard pressed to, highlight stuff besides Batman. Come on, people, didn't we get... We got really bad Spider-Man games.
DC Universe Online was a big deal.
Oh, yeah. John, you fell into that for a while.
Yeah, I did. And if I was going to name one from this generation, that might be mine that's actually based on something. Now, I got really into Infamous as well, but obviously that's not based on a comic. They've got comics based on it. DCU Online I quite enjoyed and played pretty regularly for About 6 to 8 months. It's kind of an odd game in that, it's MMORPG, but it's not a particularly social one, which sort of takes a huge element out of it. At least for me, I even had friends that had it. We'd be like, oh, let's meet up. But when you actually do go off together and go on a mission together, you sort of all lose track of each other, and there's not really that type of support that you get from other MMORPGs that I've played. It's pretty much like an online one-player experience where a whole bunch of people are playing a one-player game in the same world. But I liked the variety of the characters. I liked interacting with all the characters in the DCU. I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, and I would say that that's just indicative of what MMOs are now, because I do feel that most of them aren't very social anymore, and they are very much like single-player games that if you want to group up with a bunch of people, you can, but you don't necessarily have to. And that's kind of lost the luster for me with MMOs. But, yeah, and I guess, like the Lego games, I mean,
Oh, yeah, I just played, actually, this weekend, I just played both Scribblenauts Unmasked and Lego Marvel Superheroes.
Oh, there you go.
Both of those games this weekend. Scribblenauts was gameplay. I've never played a Scribblenauts game before. I'm not quite even sure that I understand it. It's sort of a beat 'em up, but not really. It's sort of like you come across characters that ask you for things. You type in the word for the thing that they're asking for, and it appears, and you give it to them. And that seems to be how the gameplay goes. But I was amazed by the depth of DC characters that were in that game. Like, everyone you could possibly imagine is in that game. And then Lego Marvel Superheroes was a much more fun, more cohesive gameplay experience. I mean, it plays like all the other Lego games, but again, you're talking about like tons of Marvel characters and lots of hidden Easter eggs, and it has a lot of humor to it. I would say, like, for me right now, honestly, if you handed me $60 on a next-gen console, I'd go Lego Marvel Superheroes over Batman. I'm sorry, guys, but I would rather play that than Arkham Origins.
Well, yeah, from what I've heard of Arkham Origins, I don't think I'm really keen on playing it either because, one, I hate prequel games, and two, from what I've heard, it's a really poor example of a prequel for Batman, which could have been an amazing game, because I think the idea of playing Batman 1.0, as far as him not having a lot of his gear and stuff like that, is kind of amazing, but it sounds like they just, took the assets from Arkham City and changed some stuff around, and then, changed the voice actor for Batman and called it a day.
You know what? I actually did play Arkham Origins because it came with my roommate's video card. It was pre-installed, or he got a code or something. And I actually like one of the mechanics a lot more in City. They take the whole detective story to a whole new level. And when you are basically detecting a room, when you're analyzing everything, it goes through a whole backstory, and you kind of see how his mind would work visually as he's explaining how things happen. And it never worked like that before Origins. That's the one area where I think they improved. But I'm not going to play that either because it's a fucking prequel, and I already got the best story I ever could have wanted on City. And I hate when they backtrack like that too, Julian.
Yeah, well, and the thing, and I've been saying this for years, and John has heard my concept for a long time, and this comes actually because of the Batman and Robin game for PlayStation 1, which was hailed as this open world game before we knew what open world games were.
Oh, yeah.
Where you were actually supposed to be able to explore Gotham City in its entirety and look for clues and try to piece things together, but the thing was total garbage. But that's what I want, because I still feel that any medium outside of the comics seems to neglect the world's greatest detective part of Batman. We have the detective vision in the Arkham games, but that's really just more of a breadcrumb trail to get you to your next objective. But, what I want is an open world Gotham, all of Gotham, where you're in the Batcave, you're analyzing stuff that you found, you have a lead, you hop in the Batmobile, drive to an area, try to pump some guys for information the way that Batman does, which is hanging them from ledges and beating the crap out of them and stuff. Of course, you would find, random things to do, but it wouldn't be that Arkham City thing where it's just, constantly, yelling at you. It'd be more of like, if you see something visually happening, you can decide if you want to go, intervene. But also just this whole idea of piecing things together. And I think what I want is I want a video game version of The Long Halloween, which is something that takes place over an entire year instead of what the Arkham games are, which is one really bad night for Batman. I think they need to get away from that.
But you're forgetting the one amazing mechanic that you would have, which should be to date whoever you wanted, like the Oracle, because that shit would be hot.
I was actually more thinking that, like, there would be parts which would be like L.A. Noire, where you're investigating crime scenes, you know, old school style, and, you know, looking for fibers and stuff like that. But yeah, sure, you could try to hit on Oracle.
Dude, you like looking for fibers and stuff, and all of a sudden both of you are like, oh, we're looking for fibers a lot. Let's get it on.
I just think there's one important aspect of Oracle that you're forgetting.
Yeah.
The handicap?
Yeah. Okay, so, me and John kind of mentioned it, but Patrick, you had talked about, like, what we would love to see, you know, like either a superhero game or a type of game that we haven't seen yet that we'd like to. Like, what's yours?
With me?
Yes, Patrick.
Oh, I thought you said I talked about it.
No, me and John did.
Right. I mentioned it for a second, but I mean, I don't think that the Fables game we're going to get is the Fables game that I want, and I think that's the biggest property I really want something to dive into, because I am totally all about living with, like, those kind of characters. Like, I would love to live with Cinderella if she let me. I would love to live with Rose Red. And, I mean, the Big Bad Wolf seems pretty cool to hang around, but I can't do that if I don't have this open world game where I can, like, meet Geppetto's army and kill them all.
Starting to feel that Patrick is feeling lonely lately. Angelo, I mean, obviously, you know of superheroes and stuff, right, and you play superhero games, so I'm sure that you're a very creative person, so I'm sure you have something.
I do. My idea was I can tell you exactly why this idea is on my mind, too, because we just finished playing El Shaddai, and that game does something that, when I explain this, you'll kind of understand. I want to do a game where you do not play as the hero, you play as the villain. But I want you to play as a really crazy villain. I'm talking like Joker or Carnage or somebody who's just, like, completely insane.
Yes, a Joker game.
A Joker game. But I want it to be like you see the world through his perspective. See, like in El Shaddai, they did a really interesting thing with the visuals where everything was hyper stylized to get, I think, and when we discussed this to a point where it kind of felt like Enoch doesn't see the world the same way everybody else does, and that's why the game is maybe presented this way. But I kind of want it to be that way, but from, like, an evil perspective instead of from a somebody who is following God's command perspective, I guess. So I want it to be like, how does Carnage see the world? What does he see his objective is? What's his motivation? You know, maybe instead of Ezekiel getting phone calls from, like, Lucifer, it would be Carnage getting, like, talking to the Symbionite suit itself. And, like, having that kind of lead him. And it's interesting because, I mean, again, Enoch had an unreliable narrator. It's Lucifer, which subtle, right? Probably Lucifer. Yeah. So, I mean, the Symbionite's obviously evil, but at the same time, it doesn't present itself as evil. It presents itself as your friend, your guide, your whatever. So here you are doing all these wretched, horrible things as Carnage or as the Joker. Maybe the Joker could just talk to himself because he's crazy.
Talk to the acid.
Yeah, talk to the acid, talk to whatever. Talk to his own mind, maybe just some sort of visual representation of himself or whatever, to sort of give you...
face after he cuts it off.
Yeah. Who knows? Here's why you need to do this thing. Here's what this is going to accomplish. Here's why this is good for you. That kind of a thing. Just a complete... And no platforming. Julian.
Well, that goes without saying. It's funny you bring up Joker, too, because that would be so amazing, just because I remember, the first time that Batman meets up with Joker after Robin died. It's a really interesting arc where Joker teams up with the Scarecrow, and the Scarecrow keeps, like, threatening to gas the Joker with his fear toxin, and every time he says it, Joker just laughs and says, I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, just the idea of seeing what goes on in that guy's head would be kind of amazing.
It would be so cool. Carnage is more of the maniacal, just, I want to kill everything in sight. But I almost thought if you could make the Symbionite suit an actual character, and have it, like, there's a relationship between the two of them that comics, at least from what I read, never really explore. It's just like, hey, here's two crazy things that met each other in the dark, and they're an unstoppable force now. But what goes on inside there? What is this motivation that they both have, that they both share back and forth? What do they see as happening? You know, I don't. It'd be neat to see, explore, and understand, I guess, a little bit more of.
There's actually this mini-series going on right now that coincides with Superior Spider-Man called Superior Carnage, and I got, like, all the issues so far, and it goes into it a little bit. I mean, not as much as you and I would both want, but yeah, I mean, there's some twists and turns that I did not see happening. Like, the person who I thought was going to be Carnage didn't end up being Carnage because the symbiote just, like, you know, takes no prisoners.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a little crazy, too.
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess this episode has been a little crazy.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Mm-hmm.
See? Transition!
Right, transitioning into the end. I really had a lot of fun with this.
Yeah.
I think we came to some good places. And see, Angelo, you were able to contribute even though you don't read comic books.
I'm so happy.
And I actually hope that you check out some of these books and then get back to us and let us know what you think.
I will.
And you listeners, let us know what you think, not only of this episode, but of some of your favorite comics and comic book-based video games. Furries, I don't want to hear that I was wrong about Sonic. I don't want to hear it. just go away. But listen to our show.
Talk to me, furries.
Oh, jeez, Patrick, you are lonely.
But I think that's going to kind of do it for this episode. John, did you have anything that you wanted to, talk about as far as stuff you've been up to before we go?
I would like to pimp Zero Charisma, which has been pimped on the show before, but is actually accessible to people now, because beforehand it wasn't, and now people can actually rent it on all VOD platforms, Amazon, iTunes, Vudu, your Comcast, Time Warner, all that stuff. It's a comedy, an indie comedy about gaming, and I highly recommend it, even though I am in it. But I would say please rent my movie Zero Charisma, and I hope you enjoy it. And follow me on Twitter at Gholson, Gholson.
Is there going to be a DVD release in the future? Because I would like to have one.
I don't. Yeah, there will be. That's in Nerdist and Tribeca's hands. Probably, I would imagine, sometime in the spring in 2014. That's a guess, but yeah, that's in their hands. So we'll see.
But in the meantime, check that movie out because it definitely is worth repeat views. So watch it and enjoy it.
Do you think Chris Hardwick is like listening now because he knows who you are, John? And he's like, oh man, this podcast also has the word nerd in it. I have competition.
Oh, jeez.
I don't know if Chris Hardwick knows who I am. He actually, on the Nerdist show, thought that I was just a guy that... I play... In the movie, I play a guy that works at a game store, and he didn't think I was an actor. He thought I was, like, a guy that actually they just found working at a game store.
Like an extra?
Yeah.
That you do your job really, really well.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it does. So.
Excellent. Well, yeah, and then, of course, you can find the rest of us on Twitter. Patrick?
I'm at some boss.
Angelo.
At Pixel AJ.
And you can find me at Julian_Titus. Also, please go to Pixelbit and check out my piece on Marketing 101. Nintendo is already up, and actually Sony should be up by the time that this comes out, and then Microsoft will be up just a few days before the Xbox One comes out. And basically that's an exhaustive researching thing that I've been doing about the different marketing campaigns historically for console launches from the big three, and it's kind of interesting to see how things have changed over the years.
It's definitely made me more conscious of like the marketing campaigns happening now, and like realizing how much better things are than they used to be.
Oh man, Nintendo! I saw 2 Nintendo commercials today that were so classic that it made me want to cry. The one for the new Zelda for 3DS is like classic Nintendo ad, like just perfect. And then the one for it's like an ad for the Wii U, but also an ad for Super Mario 3D World. And it's basically like these kids making a presentation to their parents saying that like, you know, family time is going down and they need to upgrade to the Wii U to bring it back up. And it was just, it just reminded me of like those pictures on the back of the NES box where you had like the family all grouped around the TV playing Super Mario Brothers or Duck Hunt. Like, it was just so good.
Remember the box art? Remember the box art for Anticipation?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it right there.
Yeah. And hopefully you will anticipate the next episode of Nerds Without Pants. Oh, I'm on a roll!
Who doesn't?
Well done, sir.
Thank you. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you as always for listening. And yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks. So for myself, John, Patrick, and Angelo, keep it pantsless, Internet. Goodbye.
Bye.
Alright, time to put my pants back on.
No!
I'm wearing...
What, after all I talk about Oracle?
Oh shit, you're right.